Hi, and welcome back to the Sectigo Identity for Security Summit. I'm Tim Callan, Chief Compliance Officer at Sectigo, and I'm sitting here with Jason Soroko, CTO of PKI at Sectigo. How are you doing today, Jay?
I'm doing great, Tim. Thanks for having me.
So this session is CA Agnostic Certificate Lifecycle Management for the Modern Enterprise. CA Agnostic Certificate Lifecycle Management for the Modern Enterprise. So this is where we're going to get into some of the considerations for your CLM solution and how it connects to the various kinds of certificates that you may need to be able to use within your environment. And there's a few things I think we're going to go over today. First of all, just give a picture of the modern digital identity landscape. It's very different than it was even a few years ago. And such that, we talk to a lot of people who they know it, but they don't really think about how really different it is. And so this is a good point for us to start with, just so we all understand we're on the same playing field or the same level. And then we'll talk a little bit about how CLM solutions fit into that. And finally, extrapolating this to a concept that we think is very important to consider, which is what we would call CA agnostic, or I think better to call it certificate agnostic. And we'll get into what that really means as we start to discuss this presentation. As a reminder, we do have a Speak to Us button, and the Speak to Us button makes it possible for you to post your questions or your comments. And Jason and I have an associate who is manning that button right now while we're talking, and we'll make sure that we respond to your questions and comments right away. So as we mentioned, so certificate use cases in the enterprise, as you like to say, Jason, it's not your grandparents' PKI anymore.
Exactly, Tim. There's a lot of use cases that everybody has known and loved with their PKI for a long, long time. A lot of them have to do with just straight up authentication from the private case. And from a public case, I mean, we've been using TLS SSL certificates for our web servers now for a very long time.
Very long.
And I think that even things like SMIME certificates, right? These things have been around, and even though I think the technologies have transformed quite a bit for them, what we're finding now is it's not just a matter of, geez, there's a lot of digital identities. It's, geez, there's a lot of new use cases that use digital identities. And so you're having this multiplication times multiplication problem for your certificate management, Tim. And, off of the new transformational use cases list, one of my favorites I love to talk about is DevOps.
Yeah.
And you might have heard us on other webinars in this summit talking about the DevOps case, which is, it's hard to talk about DevOps without talking about containers and Kubernetes. And the one thing that I'd like to mention to everybody, here's your homework. Go back to your enterprise and find out how many Kubernetes clusters your development teams are using, and realize that there is a certificate authority underneath that. And that is issuing a lot of short-term certificates into containers and doing a lot of very important security within your new modern applications for the enterprise. And I'll tell you, Tim, getting visibility to that, adding that into your governance, the evolution of these new enterprise use cases as companies transform into being digital companies, the numbers of digital identities now just exploding.
Yeah, and some of these I think are areas where probably there's been a need for a little while. I'm thinking about mobile BYOD, right? People have been accessing with mobile devices, and especially their own devices, for quite a few years now. And the ability to really put strong authentication on that has always been a little lacking, in all honesty. But then some of these things are very hot, right? Like RPA, robotic process automation. I mean, were we all even talking about that 2 years ago? No. 1 year ago, barely. And so, but do you need digital identity to make that work correctly? Absolutely. Without that, you're sunk, right? Passwordless authentication, SSH certificates as opposed to keys, standalone keys. These are all very current topics, but all of these things are really raising the stakes on doing digital identity correctly,
Yeah, Tim, I think that this extends into very, very close to the chest human use cases, such as passwordless. In other
Hmm.
words, the ability to authenticate with a more secure, better user experience way. But we're also talking about exactly what you just said, DevOps and RPA, which are entirely
Yeah,
it's about removing the human being from the equation, and yet we now have machines and software bots that are doing their own forms of authentication. And
right.
I'll tell you, software bots and IoT devices and all these things, they're really not about good old fashioned enter in a password, enter in an MFA. This is about using client certificates to do that authentication.
Yeah, for sure. And so this has led us to a very different environment where uh, uh, we really need to think about automation of these solutions. And this has when you and I first were talking about this topic, each of us years ago, we didn't have this word CLM, right? Nobody said certificate lifecycle management. We just sort of said certificate automation, automation of certificate services, right? But now this word has emerged, and it's very important to understand that for a lot of the new use cases on the previous slide, without automation, you simply cannot. There is no manual equivalent. And even if you can, with the number of servers we have proliferating, with the time periods, the duration of servers going down, of certificates going down, with the various different, all the different aspects we're touching, right? We're going to put it on your client machine. We're going to put it on your mobile device. We're going to put it on my servers. We're going to, the, the management task and the renewal task is orders of magnitude harder than it was even a few years ago, let alone for the things like DevOps where it's just flat out, or RPA where it's just flat out impossible. Right, Jay?
What we're talking about is having moved from a world, Tim, where not even that long ago,
Mm-hmm.
people were managing their SSL certificates with a spreadsheet and doing the configuration management and moving around to those certificates manually,
Yeah.
like literally manually. And think about the cost to that. Think about the costs of that's a Linux administrator spending half an hour to modify their Apache or Nginx configurations and probably very not securely moving certificate material from its source to its destination and perhaps getting it wrong and then not renewing correctly and you having downtime. Oh my goodness, the pain. Well,
Right.
multiply that now, Tim, by not just, one cert every 3 years or 2 years or 1 year, but now we're talking about a lot of certificates being used sometimes hourly. Think about that DevOps scenario or that
Mm-hmm.
RPA scenario. You might be having certificates with a lifespan of hours
Yeah.
and not just using
Or
a
a day.
few. You might be using thousands in a day. And how are you managing that? It's no longer about a question of are you using certificate lifecycle management? For some of these use cases, there's simply no choice. You have to be using the specialized protocols that securely get the certificates from where they need to be to where they need to be in a secure manner and into a secure place. The
Yeah.
the entire wrapping together of all of these technologies is what is certificate lifecycle management.
Absolutely. And I probably would be remiss if I left this slide. We're all the way to slide 3 and we haven't mentioned COVID yet. So I'd probably remiss if I didn't point out, of course, that the massive work from home, I don't even want to say trend isn't strong enough, but this, the incredible migration to work from home that came starting last year and continues to this day just amped all of this stuff up several fold what it had been before. And so even if you were getting away with it, or even if you weren't quite doing digital identity as broadly or comprehensively or thoroughly as you should be, that changed in an awful hurry. So that enters all of this as well. And yeah, so we get to the point where you really need a CLM solution, and you don't just need a CLM solution, but you need a CLM solution that can deal with the vast combination of the certificates that you're going to be dealing with, right? But but we're getting ahead. What happens if it doesn't work, right? So we just threw a few examples here. Let's just go with the upper left one. That's probably the most famous of these examples. So the O2 outage. This was in January of 2019, if my memory serves. Let's make sure I'm getting the year on
Yeah,
that right.
it goes
I think that's
back.
it.
It goes back a bit, but it's an important one
Yeah.
because of
hmm
just the sheer number of customers it affected, the amount that it affected the
Right.
brand, and
So
the complete outage of the system.
yeah, we all remember the headlines, right? All of the mobile phones, every mobile device that was on the O2 network or on the SoftBank network on Japan or a few other smaller networks scattered around the world, all lost their data for nearly a day. Huge, unprecedented. And it goes back to, at the end of it, when all was said and done, it goes back to the root cause analysis. Turns out to be that there was a back end system that was operated by Ericsson and a certificate expiration, an unknown certificate that did not get renewed, that expired, brought down their systems in the back end. It caused a rolling outage, a sweeping rolling outage that eventually took down all of the data services for both of these networks. And it's been estimated that the SLA violations, the SLA penalties for that came in at more than 100 million euros. So, the consequences are huge. And this is the kind of thing that can happen when certificates are not known about, are not renewed, are not successfully managed, are not available, are not deployed correctly. That's when all of these things can occur.
That's it, Tim. Let's just keep in mind, right? Ericsson, most of you are familiar with the company, but we're talking about a company that has a lot of employees, a lot of very technical
Yeah,
employees, very smart people. They're a tech-based company, tons of resources,
right.
more than smart enough to be able to handle this, and yet they failed. And Tim, you and I quite often talk about this outage topic,
Yeah,
and it never seems to cease to amaze us the size of the companies that
yeah,
have full competence to do this right, that
right.
simply just drop the ball on
And in the
something that
last
is just so
few
important.
years, right, in the last few years, my headlines have included Microsoft, LinkedIn, Google, Nintendo, Sony. I mean, these are companies that have the resources, have the know-how, have the technical staff in house, and they can make this mistake. And if they can make this mistake, then, gee, what do you think your average 100-year-old offline transportation company, can they make that mistake? Yeah, I bet you they probably can. Right?
And
So
they have.
and they have, right? So that's the thing. So the stakes are high, and the stakes are getting higher. And one of the reasons the stakes are getting higher is that everything is getting so digital, and all of these digital systems are being connected to each other. Like, if you don't have digital capabilities, you can't really operate anymore, right? And so it used to be, once upon a time, if you had a server and your certificate missed in your server, then that one specific function would go down. This one employee couldn't do this one thing, or this one set of employees couldn't do this one thing. But now that's connected to another system and another system and another system. And so you have a downstream problem, downstream problem, downstream problem. And that's how come these things magnify and build, and you wind up with these, massive outages and these massive problems. I think we may have talked to what's on this slide already. PKI obviously is central to making all of this stuff work correctly. It really is what we need for digital identity to work. Maybe one of the points to be made here is it's not just for humans, right? Like, we get the idea of the human, and I sit and I type in my password and I verify that I'm really the person who's supposed to be logging into this website. But in our modern architecture, there are agents, for want of a better word, that are working inside of your environment. They're doing things they're supposed to do, and one server is talking to another server and it's asking it to do something, or one task is talking to another task and it's asking it to do something. And this might be in a cloud, it might be on a server, it might be running through something like RPA. And in every one of these cases, you need digital identity. Because if you don't have digital identity in place, then there's no way to distinguish my agent that's doing what I'm supposed to be doing to succeed as a modern enterprise from that bad guy who has gotten through the perimeter and is wandering around navigating inside my network, stealing information and taking action. Right, Jay?
Tim, let's take this term that we see in the title here, establishing digital trust. And it is not something that we talk about often enough, mainly because probably we take it for granted. But one of the things that PKI gives you is this ability to extend trust, not just to the people that are closest to you, or machines that you know are going to be authenticating to each other, but also to third parties. Let me give you a perfect example that's on this slide, multi-cloud. A lot of people don't realize, but if you're using digital identity management that's locked into Amazon AWS, Google Cloud, Amazon Azure, right? Pick your public cloud of choice. Chances are you will only be able to extend trust within that system. That's what it's designed for. But a true PKI from a third-party CA, such as a Sectigo, will be able to extend trust so that you can have hybrid networking systems that work across multiple public clouds, your own private cloud, your own enterprise network, and also extend trust to your partners and other entities that you may want to have interoperability with. Think about the cases in manufacturing where you might have, pick your large device vendor of choice who wants to build a device that's capable of working within an ecosystem of other large, big megatech company vendors that are part of this ecosystem. Well, how do you extend trust between them? How do you do strong authentication between those devices? That's PKI. So all of these forms of interoperability, working with partners, doing B2B, doing B2C, not being locked into multi-cloud. These are all part of the fruits of what certificate lifecycle management gives you as part of modern PKI.
Gotcha. I think that's well said. So, what do you need for a modern CLM system to succeed? And we want to call out a few things here. One of which is what we have, continuous discovery here. So discovery is very important. So many of these problems happen because there are certificates that ultimately aren't known by the people who are responsible for certificates. And this can happen a variety of ways, but one of the common scenarios is basically a shadow IT scenario. So somebody who doesn't roll up to the office of the CIO commissions some technical work that is done by some group of people, person or people who may be employees or not employees. And at the end of the day, these systems wind up stood up and running and it's all working correctly. And one of the things that those people did was they got some certificates and they used those certificates. And those certificates are not known about. And nobody thinks about the fact that in a year, those certificates are going to stop working until it's a year later and they have stopped working. And suddenly we have an outage. And so discovery is very valuable because what discovery will do is it'll allow you to know what those things are, find those rogue certificates, bring them under management, and make sure that you don't have any kind of hard lesson that way.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Tim. I think visibility is the fundamental building block that you need in order to get to governance, which is another very important part of the capability here that you're trying to work towards.
Right. Another core capability is just issuing the certificates. We should maybe almost say provisioning, right? So getting the certificate issued is great and important, but making sure that the certificate is installed and installed correctly is equally important. And as far down that path as you can get, down that last mile to certificate is sitting on hardware, working. It is what we expect and it is working correctly. That's key. That's very important because we also see people have outages and problems because that installation doesn't happen or doesn't happen on time or goes wrong.
Well, you can just about flip through any DEF CON or Black Hat conference or security conference of your choice, and you will see poor implementations of digital identities being stored in bad places, being moved across networks incorrectly, insecurely, bad implementations. Getting it right means working with a security vendor that is very experienced in doing these things, and also not locking you into protocols that are proprietary so that you can then move between CAs. In other words, CA agnostic. I think that this is an important topic, especially as PKI evolves into being, a CA-driven, CA-agnostic world where getting those certificates issued from wherever you need them to be and getting those certificates to where they need to be used. There's a whole raft of technologies. Every single one of those bullet points could be another webinar, Tim. It's a gigantic topic.
Yeah, absolutely. And then lifecycle management, right? So certificates need, like we said, they're all going to expire. They're all going to need to be renewed. But there are things like we need to be able to audit them. We need to be able to revoke them. We need to know what we have. We need to forecast usage. We need to do budgeting. And so you need a complete life cycle, right, for every one of these certificates. And we need to make sure that you can handle them and track what they are. And CLM is a key part of making that happen.
Tim, my only comment here is keep in mind that having a CA per, for example, a private CA per use case is painful. And so therefore, one of the things you may want to keep in mind is what happens if you're an organization that actually has multiple lines of business, each one of them needing their own issuance servers for certificates. And there's a tacit trust amongst them, but the way that you want to organize the issuance and keeping track of which certs are coming from where, going to where, based on your product lines and based on perhaps even the partners you're dealing with, and keeping visibility of all of those things without having to have multiple PKI teams or multiple PKIs, which was usually the case. I think this is an under talked about topic, and it's a core capability of a life cycle management. It's not just the life cycle of an individual certificate issuance system. It can be multiple systems brought under one pane of glass.
Gotcha. I think that's a very important point. And then key management, keys. Jay, talk to us about key management.
Key management's hard. Key management is hard. Think about all the different use cases where sometimes keys are generated because of entropy issues up at the server side. Sometimes they're generated right on the mobile device. Sometimes they're generated on a device, IoT device. Goodness, the ability to be able to have cryptographic key management that is accessible to where it needs to be from. Tim, this is, again, we can have an entire webinar just on some of these bullet points, but I would say to you this, what we have seen in the past is, a lot of open source software that's out there right now for use cases such as DevOps might be giving advice to your developers, your operations people. Hey, go off and download this, piece of open source and have them just generally generate their own keys that are of goodness knows what cryptographic algorithm, goodness knows what key length. Well, these are things that need to be chosen incredibly carefully. And what I would say is, Tim, out of all of these features, out of all these core capabilities, I think that this is the one where you need to be talking to an experienced security vendor, such as a Sectigo, in order to be able to get this right for your enterprise.
Yeah. The CLM needs to be able to do all these things, but another thing that we want to introduce you here is the concept of a CLM that is fundamentally what I'm going to call certificate agnostic. And what I mean by that is that you have a lot of different certs. Like if you go back to the beginning, one of the points we made here is there are a lot of different kinds of certificates I'm using. There are different use cases. I've got client certs, I've got server certs, I've got long-lived things, short-lived things. And they can take many forms, but what you ultimately need to do is they all expire, they all need to be installed correctly, and if they're not, they all cause you to have a problem. And all of that's the same, regardless of what else is going on. And so it's not really an excuse to say, well, these certs are different from those certs. We handled this batch okay, but that batch over there was the one that ultimately caused us to fail, right? We still failed. And so you want to think about, when you're thinking about a CLM platform, I want to think about this concept of it being certificate agnostic. And what we mean by that is it will do all of the use cases, all of the types of certificates that you have. So we kind of rolled this out. It should be able to handle all of your certificates regardless of type, which is to say SSL, SMIME, doc signing, different kinds of SSL, EV, OVDV, configuration, term, hashing algorithm, key size, etc. Environment, like what's the physical environment? Where is it located? Is it in premise? Is it somewhere else? Is it in somebody's cloud, public cloud? But also the use case, right? Are we doing an IoT kind of situation, a DevOps kind of situation? And then here I said, what's the physical machine location? It's a server, it's a laptop, it's a router, it's a Wi-Fi device. And finally the origin, right? It's from a public CA. It's from my own private CA, one of several private CAs. It's from my MSCA. It's from a private CA that's a managed service, etc. And you need to have a mix of all 5 of these things. So I could have different certificate types from different origins on different environments in a different physical place. Some are remote, some are on my floor, some are this type and some are that type, and some are public and some are private. And all this stuff just sits together in this big, giant stew. And no matter what that set of configurations are that connect to each other, it's gotta work. And that's the concept of certificate agnostic.
Well said, Tim. I think that you could even add in to this, you're painting the picture of a very typical modern enterprise.
Yes.
And that's the truth. And it's for anybody going through digital transformation, you're going to end up here with this level of complexity. You don't want to be dealing with multiple sets of tools for each of these scenarios, because the cross product of each of these Tims is a lot, right? This plus this times this times this times this equals a lot of systems. Right. There's no way you're going to be able to survive that level of complexity.
And if you have exceptions, right? Well, hey, so did we get a report? Here's all the report. But let me tell you what's not in the report. So the insert's over here because these are in the public cloud. Once you start going down that road, you're going to miss things.
Tim, now let's add in some other cross products that haven't been mentioned even on this slide, but multiply this by future M&A.
Okay.
Multiply this by number of partners. Multiply this by your B2B and your B2C. Multiply this by interoperability in consortia.
By every single department in your company that's off doing its own shadow IT initiatives, by every independent BU that is running parallel to the other BUs, by every company that's got special dispensations and carve-outs that it got when they originally acquired them 7 years ago as part of the contract, and they're still operating that way to this day. Yep.
So Tim, what I want to say very, very clearly to anybody watching this webinar is, for those of you who knew PKI 10, 15 years ago, and you're wondering, what in the world are we talking about here? Because this used to be impossible. This is exactly what Tim said earlier. This is not your grandpa's PKI. This PKI today is able to handle all of these cross-product problems together.
Yep, and demand that. And I think part of our point is demand that. Like, you should expect your automation platform, your CLM platform, to give you that. And if it's not giving you that, you need to work on that problem. Right? So, some factors when you're thinking about CLM and you're thinking about a certificate agnostic CLM, here are some things to think about. And just let's maybe really read these off and talk about them. Can the platform offer the full set of certificate agnostic capabilities you need for your environments and use cases? I think we talked about that, right? You need to look through and you say, what certificate types do I have? Where are they coming from? What's our environment? What's our use case? And are they all going to work? Pure and simple. Number 2, can the provider offer public certificates and automated management in a single one-stop shop? So there's a lot to be said for reducing the number of vendors you need, and there's the good old-fashioned one throat to choke, situation, which is to say, at the end of the day, I can come to you and say, look, you just got to make it work. And that certainly is a plus, and it's something that you might want to consider. And then finally, can this provider offer you other PKI expertise? So, am I getting a management platform, or am I getting a management platform and an expert advisor who can help me configure and manage and operate my PKI successfully and
Tim,
securely?
in really simple terms, when you're doing procurement, you got to ask yourself, all right, I'm getting this thing that's called a CLM.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Can I also, with the same vendor, get my issuance? In other words, are they a CA, or do I have to go get another contract?
Right.
Also, are all of my use cases covered? This is something you talked about earlier. But what I would also like to add is this CLM vendor future-proofing me? In other words, do they look like a CLM vendor that is going to be able to handle the quantum apocalypse? Is this a CLM vendor that is going to be able to handle use cases that are very advanced in the future? Because your enterprise will be dealing with this. If you think your enterprise isn't playing DevOps, do the homework and find out that, yes, you are. You might find out that your enterprise actually has various kinds of load balancers, Wi-Fi, access points, all those use cases that Tim talked about earlier. You might find out that you're doing multi-cloud. I think the one of the issues is the person who's doing the procurement quite often is dealing with a singular use case. But for your enterprise, bring together the team of people that are necessary to talk about all of these use cases together and challenge your vendor to be able to handle all of them simultaneously. That's your challenge.
And I'm glad you brought up this future-proofing thing, Jay. This is important because one of the things we see that happens a lot is that you get this expansion. It's very common. You get this expansion of use cases inside the enterprises. So someone gets going and they're working on PKI for something, and there's other people elsewhere who wanted to do this, and they're just waiting for someone to break the glass ceiling, right? Or don't realize they want to do this until they see someone else doing it and saying, aha, yes, I need that. And so we see this over and over again, which is another one crops up, another instance, another use case, another type, another cluster. And they just keep coming and coming and coming and coming. And so what you're doing today isn't the footprint you're going to have in 2 years.
I guarantee it.
Yeah, and so we need something that's going to seamlessly allow that expansion of applications and use cases and environments to occur without suddenly, like you said, fragmenting your tools.
So Tim, what last year or even this year, we might sit down with a customer who, that person who's in front of us, they're obsessed with making sure that they have certificate lifecycle management for their publicly trusted certificates. That's not unusual.
Right.
And when we mention a use case such as DevOps or mobile device access point security, that person might go, I don't even know if we do that, but oh, hang on. Yeah, let me look through my Outlook here. Yeah, I have an entire team of people in my enterprise doing that. What we're trying to say here is, let's bring those people together. Let's look at your totality of your needs. Don't do things in a disjointed way.
Yeah, and make sure that you're not limiting yourself down the road. So if you did like this conversation, Jason and I do a podcast. It's called Root Causes, a PKI and Security podcast. Just go to whatever your source here is and search for Root Causes PKI and you'll find it. We have hundreds of episodes. We talk about all kinds of matters that involve certificates and PKI and cryptography and digital identity and trust services and things along those lines. You can deep dive on a bunch of these topics. We have new episodes coming out all the time. We'd love to have you subscribe. We'd love to have you listen to us.